The Milwaukee Bucks are impressive. Let's get into this. After being down 0-2 and losing in pretty convincing fashion to the Brooklyn Nets, a lot of people thought that this series against the Brooklyn Nets with the Bucks was completely over at that point. KD was going off, Kyrie was playing extremely well, and James Harden wasn't even playing yet, so especially due to the fact that they didn't even have James Harden yet for the Nets, a lot of people were thinking the series is definitely over at this point, because if they get Harden back now, they're going to be completely unstoppable. And both Giannis and Chris Middleton completely didn't show up in the first two games, but in both games 3 and 4, it was completely different. Chris Middleton and Giannis completely showed up in both games. Chris Middleton in games 1 and 2 completely didn't have a shot whatsoever and was missing a ton of shots, but in games 3 and 4 he completely found his range again and starting to hit buckets like he did all during the regular season. And for Giannis in games 1 and 2 he was also kind of neutralized by Blake Griffin, which is a little interesting due to the fact that Giannis is so much more athletic and stronger and bigger than Blake Griffin. But in games 3 and 4 he completely got back to what he does during the regular season and got to the basket at will. There was still a little bit of an issue with him with his free throws and not hitting 3-point shots whatsoever, but he was starting to get to the basket a lot more effectively, and we could see that, and that's a big reason why the Bucks won games 3 and 4. The Bucks were now starting to play extremely well and similar to how they were playing during the regular season, but also the Bucks caught a pretty big break with the injury to Kyrie Irving, keeping him out for at least I think the series, which was a pretty big blow for the Nets because when he was playing, obviously we saw how well the Brooklyn Nets were playing, and now comparing to when he was out, we see how the Nets are playing. It's not nearly as good as they were before. But for the Nets, they did get back James Harden, who hasn't been playing well whatsoever. But either way, James Harden's still a superstar, and they got him back. And I don't think, when you're talking about the Nets, I don't think due to the fact that Kyrie Irving is out, anybody should feel bad for these guys. These guys have 3 superstars on their team. They can deal with one being out. They're still a super team without him. And after that really good outing in games 3 and 4 for the Bucks, a lot of people now said, okay, now the Milwaukee Bucks are right back in the series, and now we could see what happens. It became an entertaining series again. But even so that the series was now tied at 2-2, a lot of people still had the Brooklyn Nets winning that series, including myself, to be honest with you. And then in game 5, the Brooklyn Nets ended up winning that game, so now a lot of people, now even more people I should say, thought the Nets were going to win this series in game 6. It was just in the fashion that the Bucks lost that game. KD completely went off in that game, and he deserves a lot of credit for that for sure. But the Bucks were up for the majority of the game, and they were up by a decent margin, and they kind of blew that lead, so it was a little demoralizing for them. So going into game 6, a lot of people thought maybe the series is over now. But once again, both Giannis and Chris Middleton had humongous games for the Bucks, and they were the main reason why they won this game, of course. When your top 2 guys have both at least 30 plus points in that game, it's very difficult to beat any team, but especially how well they played even besides the points they put up. For Chris Middleton, he had an incredible game. He had 38 points, but he also chipped in with 10 rebounds and 5 assists, but he put up a very efficient 38 points on 11 for 16 shooting, which is just nuts. And Giannis also put up 30 points in that game, also contributing 17 rebounds, 3 assists, and also a very efficient 12 for 20 shooting that game. And the Bucks won in pretty convincing fashion, so now going into game 7, it seems like it's anyone's game. But in game 6, the Bucks stars really needed to show up, and they completely did. And I just want to give a huge credit to a guy like Giannis, because me specifically actually have been criticizing him in the past and saying the reason the Bucks haven't made it that far in the playoffs in the past was due to the fact that Giannis struggles in the playoffs and he's not able to shoot, so people can put up the wall against him and he's just easier to defend. But in this playoffs, or at least this series against the Nets, and in the first round as well, Giannis has been completely going off, getting all the way to the basket, getting the shots that he wants to take, and I just want to give him a ton of credit for that. But I will say that I think Giannis still needs to get a jump shot, and especially a free throw, to hit those down in the clutch. And I know Giannis is working on it very tirelessly, and hopefully he's going to continue to get better and at least get somewhat of a 3-point jump shot going forward. But for now, I do want to give him a lot of credit for what he's been able to do in this series. He's impressed me, I will say that. In the first round series versus the Miami Heat, a lot of people actually had the Heat winning that series, even though they had a pretty down season this year, just due to the fact that they played so well against the Bucks and guarding Giannis especially last season. But in the first round, Giannis completely shut up all those haters and completely dominated the Miami Heat in that first round. And in the second round, he's also shutting up a lot of haters, saying that Giannis doesn't show up in big games. Giannis has definitely shown up in every single game so far, basically. But now, coming up for Giannis is the biggest test yet, Game 7 of the NBA playoffs. And Giannis is playing with house money. funny against this Brooklyn Nets team that nobody really expects the Bucks to beat, and the fact that they got it this far all the way to game 7 was a huge shock to a lot of people, so that's already a win. But from Giannis and the Bucks perspective, they're obviously going for this win, and in order for Giannis and the Bucks to win, they obviously need Giannis to completely go off once again, put a very efficient night up, get to the basket at will, dunk over people, get assists, get rebounds, do what Giannis does, play great defense, especially on KD if he's guarding him. That's the main guy that they need to stop. And also Chris Middleton also has to have a very good game. Again, shooting threes, hitting threes, be very efficient on the night overall, and just get buckets, what Chris Middleton normally does. And the role players have to chip in a little bit as well in order for the Bucks to actually win this game 7 game, because not to mention it's in Brooklyn, so they have a big advantage in terms of that. But of course they're going up against the Nets, who have superstars everywhere you look, and especially when you talk about a guy like Kevin Durant. We all know this guy's a pure scorer in this league and one of the best scorers of all time, but in that game 5 game he really proved what he can do. KD can pull up from absolutely anywhere on the court, and he has that size and length to shoot over anyone, no matter how good you contest the shot. We saw in especially that game 5. So he could hit that 3, he can hit the mid-range and use his size once again for those pull-ups. You just can't block this guy whatsoever. But he can also use his length and athleticism to get all the way to the basket and just dunk over you or finish around you. He's very crafty as well. He's literally just a pure scorer. He can do everything on the court in terms of scoring. Trying to stop a guy like this who can do everything on the offensive end, and he's going to be motivated going into game 7, is going to be an absolute nightmare. But for the Bucks, they're going to have to do as good of a job as they possibly could on this guy. But if KD goes off, it's going to be tough to win. But if KD goes off and James Harden plays a really good game, because he's been pretty bad so far in the series, if KD goes off and James Harden has a pretty good game, it's going to be basically impossible to beat them. So for the Bucks, the biggest thing is obviously going to be Giannis and Chris Middleton have to have a very good and a very efficient game on the offensive end, but you also really have to focus on Kevin Durant especially, but make sure James Harden doesn't have a good game as well. You really got to key in on these guys. But who do I think is actually going to win this game 7 and the series? Even though I completely praised Giannis Antetokounmpo in this video and Chris Middleton, and how especially Giannis has surprised me a ton, has been playing extremely well, I still think it's very difficult for me to pick against Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets in this series. Just knowing what this guy can do on the offensive end, and especially going into a game 7 where he's going to be extremely motivated, and the other guys they have on this Brooklyn Nets team, it's just difficult for me to pick against them, and I still do think the Nets are going to win this series, even though the Bucks have done a great job to get it to game 7. But I will say I'm completely rooting for the Milwaukee Bucks in this game 7. I'm a Knicks fan, as a lot of you may know, and I completely hate the Brooklyn Nets, especially due to the fact that they just got so many all-stars on their team. It's another reason to dislike them. But I'm rooting for the Milwaukee Bucks, but I personally think, taking emotions out of this, that the Nets are going to win the series. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think the Milwaukee Bucks could potentially take this game 7 and the series against the Nets, or do you think the Nets are going to win the series? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until next time, peace out, guys.